Welcome, everyone. Continue to introduce yourselves as you go. Any of you who have been to any of our webinars here at Alchemy will know that chat is encouraged and questioning is encouraged, and that we want to make this as interactive as possible. We have invited two amazing experts on fair, transparent, and ethical and forward-thinking use of AI into our conversation today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, but we also want to hear what you have to say as well. Our goal today is, so first off, I'm Carrie O'Donnell, and I'm the founder and CEO of Alchemy, and I'm here with Brett Christie, who many of you know. He's going to be facilitating the community engagement in today's conversation, and I'll be facilitating the conversation. So welcome and happy to have you here. Our goal today is to understand the perspective and behavior of key campus stakeholders around AI and to explore strategies for creating clear, consistent, and future-ready AI guidance and fair use. At many institutions, as you know, there isn't clear alignment between leadership, faculty, staff, and students around the use of AI. And students are paying attention and they're noticing inconsistencies even from course to course. So I think we'll probably focus a lot on teaching and learning today, but we'll have a wide-ranging conversation. So let me introduce our panelists. First is Dr. Rob McCausland. He is the Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Southern New Hampshire University, where his team shapes institution-wide AI strategy, governance, and integration. A former sociology professor and seasoned EdTech leader, Dr. McCausland works with stakeholders around the university to craft policies that embed fairness, transparency, and data privacy into teaching, research, and operations. I met Rob last year, and I thought he would be just so perfect to talk on this subject. He also oversees the AI model and tool vetting, employee and student AI literacy programs, and he steers in-house model development and advises peer institutions and nonprofits on responsible and effective AI. So our other great panelist is Gates Bryant, who I've known for many years, is a senior partner at Titan Partners, where he co-leads the Center for Higher Ed Transformation. He advises institutions, companies, and foundations and investors on strategies to drive innovation and sustainable growth in higher ed. Gates brings deep expertise in digital learning, student success, and public-private partnerships, and is a frequent speaker at EDUCAUSE, ASU GSV, and other events. Prior to Titan, he held leadership roles at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and the Parthenon Group and helped launch the education nonprofit Edify. So welcome to both of you, and I'm looking forward to having your expertise today at the table. But we're going to first start by asking a question for all of our participants. And we're going to use a tool that we use frequently. It's a real-time word cloud called Answer Garden. And so right there and in the chat is a link to Answer Garden. And I wanted to ask you to answer, how is your campus feeling about AI right now? So let's go to Answer Garden, and Brett's going to share the results as well. So just type in a one word or a phrase, whatever you feel is the sentiment on your campus today. It would be nice to get the temperature of the room. Haha. Uncertain, conflicted, hesitant, mixed, coming out loud and that is no surprise, is it? Lost and out of control. Oh boy, that's how I feel about life and the world today, as well as AI. But there's a lot of mixed feelings, and I think the kind of combination of excitement, uncertainty, and anxiety, we see that all over the place. Ambivalent, unprepared, highly divided, unguided. It's funny, a lot of institutions have been really hesitant to give guidance because so much is happening so quickly and it's changing. We had at a recent webinar, we had one of our panelists experts said, gee, we're writing everything with a pencil, not a pen when it comes to AI guidance. And I thought that was a really good way of putting it, you know. So I think this is really helpful. Our the answer garden will be in I like the tears flying up here. The answer garden will be in our as will all of our everything will be in the deck that we give with you at the end when we send you our materials. So if you have continue writing, you're welcome to. So let's start the discussion. And I'm very excited that the way we're going to start it is with a little bit of research, which I think will lend credence to the words that you just put in that word cloud. So Gates is going to introduce us to key findings from Titan's benchmark study, Time for Class 2025. So take it away, Gates.
Great. Hopefully you can see my slides. So thank you, Carrie, for hosting this panel and this webinar, and really excited to share with you some of what we've been working on at Titan Partners. For those of you who don't know us, we are an advisory firm exclusively focused on the education market. And along with 40 of my colleagues, we are in the business of providing strategic advice to organizations throughout the education ecosystem, from pre-K to workforce and everything in between. Our clients are institutions like many of you. They are foundations, investors, nonprofit organizations, and companies that are selling into the higher education ecosystem. We provide strategic planning advice, and part of what we do is really study where the market is going. And Time for Class is one of our franchise studies that we've been doing now for about 10 years. We began it in 2015 and have been active in studying the evolving practice of technology, teaching and learning, institutional policy, and instructor pedagogy and practice. And so I'm going to share a few quick highlights with you. And at the end of my section, I'll post a link in the chat to our website where you can download the paper for free and dig into as many of the details as you'd like. So without further ado, let me just jump in and provide a quick context setting. So Time for Class is one of 3 longitudinal studies that we do every year. It is focused on understanding the drivers of student success around digital learning inside the classroom. Driving Toward a Degree focuses on student advising and supports kind of outside the classroom, so to speak. And Listening to Learners is our learner-focused survey focused on identifying the student voice in their experiences with a variety of technology and institutional practices and policies. These are nationwide studies with representative samples. I'm excited to share with you today Time for Class, which includes feedback from 1,500 plus faculty, 300 administrators, representing 900 unique institutions. I'll sprinkle in some findings from our Listening to Learners study as well in this conversation. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our partners and sponsors in this work. We work with a really amazing group of organizations described at the bottom of this slide to year in, year out, put this out in the field with the ultimate goal of helping equip you all as well as your partners, vendors or technology providers, et cetera, with information that helps move the field forward in service of student success and in service of instructor efficacy. So 3 big ideas coming out of our work this year in Time for Class related to AI. We believe that we are in the early stages of institutions beginning to see AI as an enterprise tool. That's an important mindset shift. When we first started tracking the adoption of generative AI, shortly after it was launched in the late fall of 2022, It has been an organic and rapidly adopted tool, especially among students, increasingly among faculty. And I think we are now in the early stages of this move towards considering it as an enterprise asset that needs to be managed for advantage, for improved student learning and efficacy, but also it needs to be managed from a policy perspective. And so what we're seeing is these three themes: increasing individual use of generative AI. Instructors and administrators are catching up to students who have been leading the way since it was launched a few years ago. Policy at the institutional level is lagging. I'll talk a little bit about some three groups of institutions that we're seeing start to emerge. And there is an increased opportunity to drive sophisticated use of existing AI tools. We're seeing different levels of use cases as the frequency of use increases. And we're seeing opportunities for instructors ultimately to save time, even as they're producing effective instruction using AI. But we will begin to see more and more of that as institutions kind of get up the learning curve on this concept of an enterprise asset. So the adoption rates have been growing across administrators, instructors, and students. You see each of these charts. The bottom darker colors are those that use daily or weekly. We're now at 40% of administrators using generative AI tools on a frequent basis, 30% of instructors, and among students, it's even higher. So we're seeing really a large spread and wide-scale adoption. We're beginning to see agreement among instructors and administrators that students need to learn how to use generative AI. So these are a series of statements. I'll focus on a couple of them here. The first one: I believe students will need to know how to use generative AI tools for future jobs and careers. What we see is that most administrators skew to that end of the spectrum, and so do most instructors at this point. This has shifted significantly over the last 3 years as we've asked this question consecutively. One of the interesting points is the third row down, is I believe generative AI tools will facilitate instruction. Administrators are perhaps a little bit more willing to agree with that statement. Instructors are mixed. But when we separate out the instructors from the frequent users of generative AI to those that are less frequent, we see that the frequent users of generative AI actually do see it as a tool that can facilitate instruction. Most institutions are still in the early stages of developing an institution-wide AI policy, with only 28% of administrators reporting their institution has rolled one out. Much of this policy work is still very much ongoing. And even the institutions that have rolled out policy, there is still a fair amount of deference to faculty needing to make the decision around how generative AI can be used in the classroom. While that decentralized approach isn't necessarily a bad thing, one of the key things that it really elevates is the need for instructors to have the necessary supports and equipment, so to speak, to ensure that their policies that they're implementing in their own courses are grounded in what we know about how AI can improve instruction, the need for AI literacy, and the very important dynamics that exist between the use of AI and preserving and protecting academic integrity. So there's a need for support there, even as institutions are deferential at times to faculty making these choices. So we've bucketed institutions into these three categories around the extent to which they're moving quickly toward this enterprise management orientation of AI. We think only about 26% fall into that first mover category. We see high rates of institutional partnerships with LLM providers. We see, an orientation in the policies that provides training over necessarily just purely detection. And we see a much higher usage rate of AI among administrators at the first mover group of institutions. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the observers who are only about 15% of the market. They have lower rates of LLM partnership at the institution-wide level. They're not doing anything as it relates to policy, and they typically have lower rates of usage among administrators. And the builders are the folks that are kind of where the bulk of the institution set are today. And they're working on their policies as it relates to training and detection. So as you all think about your institutions, it's good to ask, where are we? Are we in one of these three categories? And how is it playing out on your campus? We see that institutions are preparing for an AI future in the sense that today they are less likely to believe that generative AI is a issue of student literacy that should be managed as a learning outcome. An increasing number of respondents see that generative AI literacy will be a learning outcome in the next 3 years. So I'm going to stop on this slide and just mention briefly that as we see instructors using generative AI on a daily basis, they see an increase, a decrease in their overall workload. We think that this tool will continue to be a productivity gaining tool for instructors. And the use cases that are available to instructors relate to assessment development and course content development and a whole variety of other areas. You can look that up in the paper, and I'll place the link to the paper in the chat. I've seen a lot of chat questions come up, so I can't watch them all as I've been talking here. So I hopefully have a few minutes to respond to some of your questions and comments. I look forward to those, but I'll stop sharing at this point.
Thank you so much, Gates. Rob, I'd love to hear, like, when you see these, what jumps out at you pertaining to what you've seen at Southern New Hampshire?
Yeah, I mean, the Titan report we had been looking at for a little while. I had a conversation at D2L Fusion where we dug into it quite a bit. I will say, like, we are definitely an outlier. So there's, first of all, we're a very small liberal arts campus, about 3,000, 3,500 students, and then a massive online presence where we have 200,000 plus students. So very different in terms of our faculty to administrator ratio. We did internally a lot of the same research that we've seen in your report, Gates, and excellent work across the board. It's been super helpful for advising our policies going forward and how we've made adjustments and where we think we might need to reposition ourselves. But we definitely, well, to give a little context here, in May of 2023, our faculty senate actually came out with syllabus AI statements. So what was acceptable use policies for the campus environment. And that was far before most of our peer competitors across the board. And it was in November of 2023 that we actually first developed our AI guidelines for faculty. So these are policy guidelines, everything from acceptable use, what was expected, and guidance on community standards on what you should do if you are suspecting a student of using generative AI in a context where that student is not permitted to do so. So we got moving a bit earlier there. Our institution recognized fairly quickly that this was something that at an enterprise level had the ability to really change how we did business and how we serve our learners. When I stepped into this role in August of 2023, it was an interesting choice to put a sociologist in this role. I do have a background in machine learning and teaching about society and technology, and in particular artificial intelligence and its impact. But it was definitely something where they wanted someone who was not an evangelist, and that's part of one of the reasons I think our faculty have been so open and honest about their concerns. because I'm conflicted about artificial intelligence. So I don't expect our faculty to have a very clear, like, this is exactly what we need to do kind of thing. That perspective is important. And I tend to kind of label myself as a skeptical realist when it comes to artificial intelligence. And part of that has to go with exactly what you've laid out, Gates, which is we need to be working on meaningful policy and guidelines at the same time that we are going around and listening to the concerns of our faculty and staff across the institution and providing very specific training for very specific roles. So as we started our workshop series and started our institutional trainings and our mandatory AI and security trainings, we actually have seen high rates of membership, people joining these webinars, joining workshops, getting credentialed in artificial intelligence in appropriate context, and more than 92% compliance in our AI cybersecurity training. And that was all in early 2024, late 2023, and we've kept up with those. As we've developed, now we're at a point where our internal surveys that just came out about a month and a half ago, more than 60% of our and this is full-time employees, so it is admin as well as faculty, and we have not disaggregated that data. More than 60% are using AI on a weekly, daily, or multiple times a day basis. So we're definitely a bit of an outlier, but I think part of it is because of what you lay out here. Those are honestly a lot of the steps that we took. So yes, we're a little different, but having met with our peer institutions and met with other liberal arts colleges around the country and a lot of R1s, I think it's a really accurate landscape analysis for sure.
So you think, so one of the things that's come up in the in this in the chat through a variety of people, and you know, Brian Alexander asked, you know, what about faculty and staff resistance? And then Molly also at Georgetown said, and increasing student resistance. So like, what do you, how do you get such a high level of non-resistance at your institution?
You listen. I mean, like I know that sounds kind of obvious, but you don't shut people down when they have concerns. Like especially when it comes to the unethical ways in which most of these models have been built. When you're looking at bias in output, when you look at labor force concerns, when you're examining things 2-3 years down the line, they're not wrong. I mean, and so if you come at your faculty and staff like, you know, you're an evangelist, and you're like, this is going to change everything, you need to do this, get on board right now. I mean, people are going to dig in. If you listen and you hear their concerns, you acknowledge their concerns, and you find ways where you can to mitigate some of that. So looking specifically at, I'm a sociologist, right? So specifically when it comes to the structural biases that are inherent in model outputs, I look for ways that we can actually address this actively. It's one of the reasons we partnered with Latimer, which hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about a little bit later on. But you need to acknowledge this. You also point out the reality of the situation, and you recognize academic freedom. That I want to give you the tools to be successful here. I want you to understand that this is a new technology that you called us experts before, Carrie. It's one of those things that I feel super uncomfortable about because calling anybody an expert in this area right now, it always feels a little premature. Gates, I see you nodding as well. It's kind of, yeah, but faculty are right, and administrators are right when they're concerned about the impacts it's likely to have on their students, on their jobs, and we need to, and this is where you had said kind of penciling in those kind of policy work. One of your colleagues had mentioned it. We did exactly that early on. Our policy guidelines were guidelines because on a weekly basis, we were having to make changes. We had to work with communications, and it was different for our faculty than it was for our staff, and staff based upon their verticals, what departments they were in. All of that needs to be flexible. And we need to acknowledge and recognize academic freedom about how much of this do you want to use in your classroom? At the same time, educating our workforce so that they understand that this technology is here. And I would argue, and people can push back 100%, I would argue that we're not actually meeting our responsibilities if we're not preparing students for the safe and ethical usage of these tools. And again, that's my perspective. I'm happy to take that pushback, but it really is about doing that listening tour, hearing people's complaints, hearing their concerns, and then working with them to figure out ways that this can have a positive impact, or at least a neutral impact, and still serve our learner needs.
Right. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute to do a Padlet, and we'd like to hear from the audience. The audience, all of our participants here, who we're already hearing from. So happy to hear you up there chatting. But the Padlet is in chat, and you can just copy it and go on in and make some comments. But what we're looking to hear is what practices is your campus encouraging or implementing to promote fair, transparent, and ethical use of AI across the stakeholders, and particularly in teaching and learning, which is where it's coming up an awful lot. So take a few moments and give us your comments and thoughts. Like, what are you seeing out there? And then we're going to kind of get Rob to dig in a little deeper on the process you use, Rob. So let's go for it. Yeah, it's funny. The first comment there was about AI syllabus statements, because Rob said that was one of the first things that happened at SNHU, right? Was that. So, student facing permission and disclosure reminders about academic honesty. We see that a lot. We build that into a lot of the courses that we build, or to the courses as much as we can, much as we're allowed to. Um, you know, uh, um, Creating a micro credential for faculty, students, staff with badging and transcript notation options. Remind faculty to include a statement of their own, and somebody's copied and pasted a really good statement in here, and you'll have access to that later. So faculty professional development is clearly a big deal. Making sure that faculty have AI literacy there. A faculty reading group on teaching with AI. Workshops with faculty. I have heard that a lot of the training is very generic, and not just on campuses, but some of the organizations that are giving training. It's extremely generic, and people come to me afterward and say, wow, I didn't really get a lot out of that. So making sure it's very, very explicit to the task at hand and to the roles that the stakeholders play. Assessment practices, attribution, practicing and modeling attribution with course and professional materials, training for attribution with publications and conferences. What are your sources, right? Where did you get this? We need to reformat assessment from top to bottom. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that a little later in this conversation. AI tools that they're using, Copilot, a lot of Copilot and Grammarly, Gemini. Anything else there that's sticking out? Ethical use policy integrated into the academic honesty policy. I think that's a really important thing. Some people even have students sign something, just a contract that says, here's how we're going to be using it. And just I'm trying to see if there's anything else, anything that you guys see, Gates or Rob, that's just jumping out at you.
I think there's a lot of really good material in here. I did appreciate that call out about basic AI literacy, and a lot of the AI literacy trainings that we're seeing are so generic. And Ethan Mollick had a brief statement about this a few months back, where he had pointed out that if you're taking time to write an AI course and create a good AI course, the truth is that the landscape has changed by the time you're actually going to be teaching that course, whether it's an online environment or if it's something that you're offering in the classroom. In the classroom, you have the flexibility of altering your curriculum and rolling with it, as we all do. Ad-libbing is an important part of teaching, but it is something that there are ways to do basic AI literacy that focus on what is evergreen and most important. But then you called it out, Carrie, that there needs to be tool-specific training, team-specific trainings. Like if you are I'll choose sociology as an example, a sociology professor, the way that you would be using artificial intelligence in the classroom is not going to be the same as an accounting professor.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that. And so our in our environment, we'll get into it a little bit later, but we have on-demand in-classroom support for our faculty that is tailored to the courses that they are teaching. And this is, it's one of those things that you need to be prepared to do that. At the same time, you do still want that basic AI literacy component of everyone should know these things about
Yeah.
safe and ethical usage of AI for sure.
Absolutely. Well, this is very, very rich, this Padlet. And so continue if you have more things to add to it. As mentioned in the chat, this is going to be available to everybody at the end, as are all of our things, and they're also on our website. So please feel we'll feel free to peruse that at more. It was hard for me to keep just going because there's so much going on in it, So I'm going to move on from the Padlet to the next area of our thing, which is Rob. And you've talked a little bit about, you've touched on some of them, but I liked it when you laid out for me the steps you took to, at SNHU to really kind of take you to where you are, which is a little bit more sophisticated than a lot of institutions.
I think I'm gonna repeat myself a little bit here. It started with listening. And so it started with going around to each of the departments, going around to faculty senate, hearing about their concerns and listening to what they're seeing in the classroom, also listening to what they wanted to do. Because while most of our faculty, I would say the lion's share, were ambivalent, and many of them still remain so. There was a vocal minority who were absolutely in favor of AI integration and seeing what they could do and how this could change things in the classroom. And that was great, but being mindful of safety and being mindful of the nature of these tools, particularly back in 2023 when we first started this, we had to tamp down some of that enthusiasm in terms of basically, here's what we want you to do before you start deploying this. One, we need to go through and do an ethics and security, so ethics, bias, and security vetting for any AI platform or tool that's going to be used in a student-facing context. We also do that at the back end for our operational efficiency. We publicly publish which models are safe. So any faculty at this point can go to our SharePoint and they actually see which models are good for which purposes, which ones are approved internally, which ones are banned entirely. Shockingly, Grok is banned entirely. So there are a few platforms that are particularly good, Latimer and Claude. OpenAI tends to be neutral, but you want to look at each of these and you want to be very specific about what the use case would be for the individual department, faculty member, et cetera. We also set aside funding to actually provide our faculty with ways that they could be innovative in their incorporation of AI in the classroom. And that funding is managed by our department, but the group that determines who gets it is actually a faculty committee for AI integration that we set up on our campus. So we have representations from all three of our schools. You have our Arts and Sciences and Education School, we have our School of Business, we have our School of Engineering and Computational Science. And so they actually make the determinations, the faculty representatives there, about who receives the grants that we've put out for AI integration in the classroom. And we did this all in 2023 and really hard launched in 2024. By the time we got to really communicating about the changes that were coming, most of the faculty had already seen the writing on the wall. They had been seeing this in their classroom, and it was no longer a perspective of administration is forcing this on us. It's we need something. And oh, good, we actually have resources available to walk us through this. There are absolutely faculty members who want nothing to do with AI. And in those cases, recognizing academic freedom, we've left it to the departments, their AI strategy. And that can be any number of different things. But it is critical that we recognize not all faculty members want this touching their teaching environment. but those faculty members are still responsible for taking the mandatory AI security training, because we can't deny that these tools exist right now. So that's how we kind of like laid this out over time. So by the time we got to kind of mid-year 2024, by the end of spring semester, we were well established. Faculty and staff were familiar with what we did. We had set up discrete proofs of concept for new tools and new models, and we'd had a lot of success. So lots of missteps along the way, which I'm happy to get into, particularly in communications. And I will say adjuncts get overlooked all the time. And making sure that adjunct onboarding was part of our, okay, like you need to know this about our acceptable use policies. You need to know this about what is approved and what isn't for what purposes. And we still wrestle with that today. Communications are still a problem.
Right. It's great. Gates, I have a question for you. Oh, by the way, Rob, I need to come back to a bunch of people have asked if you if you can share information on what tools you've deemed to be good and not.
Yes. So I'll see if I can get something public that I can post with you guys. So we go through every new model iteration that comes out, everything from the Chinese models that actually support English language processing, some of the Japanese models as well. We have a few Nigerian models that have come into our ecosystem periodically, but we publish these, and when updates come out, we update them. We have an in-house AI cybersecurity specialist who actually goes through. We have if you're familiar with the bias testing and how you handle adversarial debiasing for tool builds, we have an expert on that who actually does exactly this, and then rates each of the models and each of the tools based on overall risk and then what they're good for. Are they good for text generation? Are they good for historical analysis, research, coding, all that?
It's really helpful. Somebody else also asked if you have a planning document that show the main actions you've taken, the steps you've taken. There's
So
some here.
So I do. Unfortunately, part of that is proprietary. So there are certain things that we keep in house. You can ping me privately, and we can have a candid conversation about that. But it is something that is ever evolving, and I have shied away from anything beyond basically 8 quarters, just because the landscape changes so dramatically that I've found strategy shifting within effectively a 3-month cycle.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Okay, Gates, I have a question for you, and you're going to probably kill me because you probably don't have an answer, but maybe you do. How do you see, like, as you see, to me, the types of schools, it's almost more like a progression than it's not really static. Like, are there practices that you see institutions doing that like brings them from the opposers to the mainstream to the early adopters? I'm thinking Michael Moore, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
laggards, So
Yeah, no, that's not a I mean, it is a tough question. It's a great question. I have some perspectives on it. Carrie, I think so. So one dynamic that is a reality is that the student voice, the student perspective on the use of AI, does not appear to be dramatically influenced by policy choices that the institution is making. And we've seen that cut in both ways. So, in the first couple of years of us doing this work with both students, administrators, and faculty, we tested different policies with students and to get their perspective on whether or not it would change their behavior. And for the most part, the restrictive policies as it relates to Gen AI use were not at all effective, at least in our work in changing student behavior or limiting student use. And so for faculty who, for any number of reasons, are deciding, not to have a position on AI or not to integrate it in their courses, obviously that's their choice, but they should know that students are making use of the tools regardless of whatever position they're taking. So a non-position or a non-choice actually is still a choice, because the students are still engaging with the tool. So what we found to be incredibly effective is when institutions provide guidance to instructors that really relate to how the tool can be used appropriately in academic assignments and in academic contexts, for the purpose of building AI literacy and in demonstrating competencies relative to the learning objectives of the given course. And so there's a lot of discussion that's, I don't think, super productive about whether or not AI is a tool that should not be used because of the academic integrity concerns. We just think that AI literacy is a critical skill for learners on a go-forward basis. And at the same time, academic integrity is critically important to the value of the degrees that students are learning. So both of these things are true. And where institutions, I think, get into trouble is when they actually dramatically change or lower their academic integrity standards in service of accommodating AI use. We actually find is that maintaining or increasing academic integrity expectations is just as important. And the critical thing that does need to change, because AI is a transformative technology in many respects, is the nature of assessment. And so that's where the most change needs to happen, frankly. And institutions that are getting out in front of evolutions to assessment are the ones that are, I think, creating a really healthy environment, given the tension that can exist between academic integrity and the use of AI.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that, and I'm not the expert by any means, but to me, AI has exposed some huge flaws in the way that students are assessed in many higher education courses already, and they were flaws to begin with, and AI's just exposed them even more. And this over reliance on objective testing and short answer testing that can so easily be gamed, not even just with AI,
Yeah,
Google,
yeah.
So,
I'd love to see in the chat, just since we're, this is such an interactive conversation. I appreciate it,
yeah,
Carrie. It's like if there's like quick little descriptions around what folks are doing from an assessment perspective, in light of this, that would be, I'd be super interested just to see the chat thread of what
I would
people
love
are
it. I would love it too.
seeing.
I will tell you, our team, my team, we support many, many institutions. We have a lot of learning designers that work as well as people use our technology. But one of the things that we see is that there's a huge increase on authentic assessments, authentic learning, active learning, more project-based learning, more peer review, and a huge increase, which Brett is a huge proponent of a greater use of formative and the balance of formative to summative changing in courses. So let's see what people said.
I'm curious.
Transparency versus
There's a
propensity.
great list going, and I don't get me started on blue books because I actually don't think that's a good, maybe a helpful temporary solution, but I'm not a big believer in blue books. Probably doesn't work for the 200,000 online learners. It's new, Rob.
It
Yeah.
doesn't. And when I had an early conversation with the math department on campus, they were like, "Hey, students can use all the AI they want, but when it comes to their exams, it's going to be." And I'm like, "Okay, so that is a strategy I will acknowledge, but probably not helpful." But that was 2023, so early days. I will say, like, one of the successes for me in right after the OpenAI announcement in November 2022, I was teaching society and technology and completely revised my assessments. And what we ended up doing was first we did an AI literacy component. And then I had students for all of their assignments working with the AI and giving me screenshots of what they were doing, how they were prompting, what the output was, and critiquing and going back and forth, and then working collaboratively with their classmates. And I had a lot of success with that. Obviously, that's an N of one, and it was a small classroom environment, only 30 students, but still, it is something that was applicable, and I was able to translate to other courses. And a number of other sociology, psychology, and communications faculty have done very similar things as well at this point. And we're starting to explore in the larger online space now what we can do to completely reimagine assessments. One of the early things I did for the online environment was we needed to do an AI audit. So we created an agent to scrape our entire curriculum, like all of the various degree programs, all of the courses, all of the assessments, and find out which ones were most most vulnerable to AI exploitation. And we're looking at AI integration, so two sides to it. But on the exploitation side, we stopped. The reason we stopped because the answer was all of them. All of our 1,500 courses are vulnerable to AI exploitation because of the nature of asynchronous assessment. We need
Mm,
to completely rethink how we're doing assessment. 100%.
yeah, I think everybody does. And listen, when I made the comment about objective and short answer, I mean, faculty can't help it when they're asked to teach a class of 150 students, right?
For sure.
Like, so, but there's a lot of interesting chat going on here around it. Almost too much to summarize. Brett, you're the great a summarizer of communications. Is there anything you have to say?
Not to summarize, but what I wanted to let folks know is this is fabulous. And so we can actually, not just provide the chat transcript, but we'll analyze this and provide a write-up of just that section of the conversation that's been taking place because it's
Analyze it using
rich.
AI.
That was the we, isn't that obvious? Yes, of course,
But
using some AI
yeah,
assistance.
we will put that out. I mean, this is very, very cool. So, questions, we're getting towards the end. And just one last question I just want to ask before my final question is, what role does transparency play in modeling ethical use?
I'm off mute right now, so I'll jump on that. Gates, definitely
That's
definitely
great.
weigh in. Um, so I have a strong I have strong opinions about ethics, bias, and looking at uh, from a faculty perspective determinations that might be made by administration. So transparency at every step of the way. Now, a lot of these technologies, if we're seeing, for example, the legislation that's coming out on a state-by-state basis, a lot of that legislation is, I'll be charitable and say well-intentioned, but it is not enforceable. So when we're thinking about the nature of the technology, full transparency is not possible. There's a certain element of black box that comes into this. We can look at the statistics that underlie the algorithms, but it's still not going to get you fully there. And then people will just fall back on well, the reason it did this is because of the training data. That's wonderful. We knew that. It's also unhelpful. Um, what we try to do is be as transparent as possible when it comes to our model evaluation rubric. So when it comes to what we're testing for regarding accuracy and overall alignment, as well as when it comes to the ethics and bias of output, we are as transparent as possible. When we tell administrative employees and faculty, no, you can't use this model, we tell them why. And we're very clear about you don't use Grok because these guardrails were removed. And in our performance evaluations, this is what we saw overall.
Yeah.
Or we use Latimer because of these reasons. Um, so being transparent there is absolutely critical. And when it comes to transparency in policy formation, making sure all the stakeholders have a seat at the table and then being able to refer back. And people are like, well, hold on, why do you say that, this is permissible and this other behavior is not? And being able to trace it back and say, because we met with these teams and the determination was very clearly that for the best usage, we want to make sure that we adhere to these guidelines. You want to explain as an administrator, as a senior faculty member, to people who will be using these tools exactly how you got to that determination. So transparency is critical.
That's great. I like this comment from Anastasia Bojanowski. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Have thresholds, contingencies, and human intervention. And that's a very nice comment. We could take one or two questions and then we'll wrap up. And meanwhile, while you're writing those, if you have a question, we won't be able to take a lot. Brett, could you just tell a little bit, take a moment to tell them what we're doing and to help the community and the micro-credential? Brett, you're on mute.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I'll take a moment here to talk about the way we're approaching it. And, as we've talked about in November 2022, that's when things changed drastically. And then January of 2023 is when campuses had to really start grappling with this new reality. And what happened in a traditional way is often the Centers for Teaching and Learning had this new thing dumped into them. And existing resources, which are usually very limited hours and resources and support. And so there's the traditional propping up of workshops. Maybe during summer, there's a boot camp and things like that. But often it's only going to reach that bandwidth of, let's say, 10 to 20%. That would be the numbers as a CTL director myself. If you reached 20% of the faculty, you were happy, you were having a good year through your programming. So we're getting this band of early adopters and champions, and that's great. You can embed department champions, but there really needs to be bigger baseline AI literacy so that it could be this collective conversation and movement forward. And so what we're trying to do is offer something that can give faculty an experience that's manageable for them to learn about AI within the educational context. As Carrie mentioned, some of the training that's out there that's free can be very in-depth, but also very generic and very technical and doesn't apply to the educational context. So we've been offering this 4-module, 30 minutes per module experience through a pilot, and we've got about 150 faculty signed up nationally. And so we're going to be expanding that, and we offer that to anybody who wants to sign up. And each module is designed to give really good use cases, information about AI and about the context, whether it's related to assessment or learning design or ethics or inclusivity, whatever it may be. That's what's covered. And then each of the 4 modules ends with a brief reflective component and also an action plan. What's the next step that you're going to take? And that's submitted. And then there's an evaluation and feedback given. And there can be a credential earned through this experience and a badge and all of that. So we're trying to make it something manageable in that 2-hour experience that really brings it into the educational context as much as possible and covers the span from knowledge and ethics to assessment and learning design, how people can adopt the AI for assessment scale, for example, and use that at different levels for different assignments. It's not just one campus policy or even syllabus policy, but how is it embedded into the assessment process or not, whatever's appropriate.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, we're giving this out. We're piloting it now, but this is written in a CC BY. It's a OER resource, and you can bring this into your training, and you can contextualize it and make it your own. We've got facilitation guides we're building, and this is just a service we're giving to the world, and you can do what you want with it because, as we talked about here, this might be your starting point for something that's more contextual on your campus across disciplines, et cetera. So, okay, we have questions. We didn't really get a lot of questions, so I'm going to just ask my question. Oh yeah, that might be too complicated. Have you done work we can see that addresses environmental and labor abuse concerns? That might be a whole, yep. Rob, you want to say something to that?
I give a talk on sustainability and AI and where we're headed here. And especially with an institution like ours, it's a primary concern because of the scope 3 emissions that come into play. So not just in terms of the AI usage, which is huge, but also actually in just the fact that we're an online institution that services the number of learners that we do. There are strategies for that, but you're right, that is a long conversation. So I'll just say, important call out and appreciate the question.
Yeah, and you can also look up. It's interesting. Brian Alexander wrote a book that was published last year that he's on here on campus, and I think it's called "Campus is Burning." I'm not sure. Maybe you could write the name of it, Brian, in there, and that's a good starting point, even without AI, to think about how campuses should be dealing with sustainability. Uh, okay, and we're just going to end with a quickie. I'm going to start with you, Gates, and then end with Rob. What's your one parting word of advice to institutions that are really looking to move along this journey?
I would say focus on redesigning, re-envisioning assessment in a post-Gen AI world. Academic integrity and artificial intelligence are not mutually exclusive competing concepts. They need to operate in the same ecosystem. And so I'd spend a lot of time and effort around driving toward a re-envisioning of assessment.
Excellent. Rob.
I definitely echo Gates' sentiment there. Reimagining assessment is absolutely critical. And we have a number of projects underway that are exploring exactly that, with the Gates Foundation in particular. But I want to talk about instead what do you do with faculty members that want to bury their head in the sand, understandably. And I'm one of those individuals. I taught social problems as a sociologist, and I would always tell my students, I'm like, look, I get it. If at the end of the day, all you want to do is just bury your head in the sand and pretend that none of this exists. But as instructors, we have an ethical responsibility. We can't actually do that. So what do you do with those faculty members? And one of those throwaway lines that people use is like, oh, well, they just got to play with it. And they'll realize. And my response is like, no, actually, that's not going to do it. What you need is a guide. And you need a person who can walk you through this, who isn't going to evangelize. You need someone who is going to listen to your skepticism, your concerns, and be patient with you as you struggle through reconciling what this means for the future of higher ed, and really patiently give you the tools necessary to make informed decisions about where to incorporate. That's what's really necessary. It's not just a play around with this tool and you'll come around to it kind of thing.
Well, thank you. We're right at the top of the hour, and boy, this has been a very engaged. Oh yeah, next week we have an AI literacy at scale, a strategic imperative for higher ed, another webinar, and we are going to be having one on AI and assessment and we're going to be having a number in the fall. One on the future of AI, one on AI and the student journey, and so keep posted and keep joining us. And thank you all for attending. And particularly thank you to Gates and Rob for leading this conversation for us. So
Thanks so much for having us.
great. Good one.